Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Bookseller Lightning Talk series, in which booksellers present short talks on tech tools, organizational strategies, communication methods, or innovations they've made in their stores.
So first off, everyone, sorry for the very rich, red, vibrant background. It is the company's color, and it just makes me look slightly demonic. But my name is Kimberly Behzadi. I am the owner and founder of Read It and Eat, Buffalo's culinary bookstore. There are about 12 other culinary bookstores in the nation. So specialty niche is my way of being. Everything foodie, predominantly cookbooks, but also specializing in food memoirs, stories, and more. And I'm here to talk to you about how a niche bookstore can still be actively involved in Independent Bookstore Day. We can go right to the next slide. I already high level told you a little bit about us, but I actually started as a book subscription box about 4 years ago and opened my brick and mortar about a year ago. So I have always specialized in food, but since opening the brick and mortar, we curate culinary adventures, focusing on new items and sidelines. And those sidelines can include baking kits, global spices, cocktail mixes, and more. We also have a cooking series called Cooks and Books, where we pair a recent cookbook with a local chef, where our students are able to have hands-on experiences ranging from making arepas to learning the difference between fermentation and pickling. So on to the next slide. So how to participate in Indie Bookstore Day. First off, Indie Bookstore Day is about community. So the first tip I really have is get out there. Buffalo specifically has something called the Buffalo Bookstore Passport Program. We have now 14 bookstores in Buffalo, and there are also more in the outer edges of Buffalo, between Buffalo and Rochester, all the way down into Erie, Pennsylvania. So we collectively decided to work together. There are many other specialty bookstores in Buffalo. We have a romance bookstore. We have one that just specializes in sci-fi and mystery. So we all decided we were unique enough to work together and build foot traffic. So with this passport program, readers have the opportunity to visit all of the stores that are participating and receive a stamp. And if you finish the passport, you're entered in for a chance for a grand prize, which is a $25 gift card from 14 bookstores. And this year we've added 2 secondary prizes for people that are making attempts but maybe don't finish. And the buy-in to the program for each bookstore is, yes, you're giving a gift card. We also now have our own web domain just for Buffalo bookstores and this passport program. But the barrier to entry is very low. And this really, I give credit to, her name is Meg Howe, and she is the owner of Alice Ever After, which is a children's bookstore in Buffalo. And this really came from, hey, I have this crazy idea. And I saw, I believe maybe she was inspired by Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. I'm going to be totally out of touch, but I love to give Meg the credit because when I was first added to the program, I was just a pop-up event that was able to be included with a book fair I host every year. So high level, we work together. And that's my biggest takeaway or first tip on how to be involved with Indie Bookstore Day is leverage your community. There are book lovers out there that might not even know that you exist. My brick and mortar is only a year old, but by being included on the map, it brings foot traffic to the store, and they might not all convert to purchasers the first time, but a lot of times people come in and go, I didn't even know you were here. So it's an awareness campaign from the beginning, and the barrier to entry to participate is pretty low. So that's community driven. On the second, leaning into your niche. So this is a different way. I am a culinary bookstore, and I think people are motivated with rewards in reading. I don't know how many of us grew up with the Pizza Hut Scholastic Book It program, for example. So our store has a bingo card. And this bingo card leverages that idea of going back to curating culinary adventures. We're food focused. So this bingo card balances culinary adventures and reading adventures. I want you to read. I want you to come buy a cookbook, but also I want you to see what's out there in Buffalo, like visiting a cafe or even just cooking for your friends. And we encourage people to fill out the back of the card with your adventures, but also to tag us on social media, which builds more content. And some of these can be achieved by coming to the bookstore for Indie Bookstore Day as well. And the reward is also geographically brought to the bookstore as well, because we are literally next door to a coffee shop. So Indie Bookstore Day, it's all about how many, in a way, it's how many bodies can you get into your bookstore. So if I can incentivize you to finish your bingo card and win a bingo gets you a gift card to the coffee shop next door, and finishing the whole card gets you a gift card, it's more ways to build foot traffic, but also very true to who we are. We want to increase attendance in our events. We want people to go on culinary adventures. So we've talked about what's out in the community, being on that passport program. Now you have some incentive that's specific to your store, but still doesn't always require a purchase. It's still increasing foot traffic and increasing attendance as well. And also leveraging what's literally next door to me, which is a small business and a cafe. And then another part of Indie Bookstore Day that I have learned, this is only my second year, but what I have learned is that my customer doesn't respond always well to a severe discount. A severe discount doesn't always convert your audience into returning customers. I want to reward people who have been supportive of Read It and Eat since I was a pop-up bookstore. So we lean into limited edition swag, limited edition merch. Last year, we leveraged Bonfire for our Indie Bookstore Day merch, which you can see the crew neck in the bottom right corner. And we're still in the process of designing and focusing on things this year for year 2. So like we have a whisk bookmark, which is again a wink and a nod leaning into my niche. We're building some tote bags, some aprons, which is what I'm wearing in the bottom left. And I'm working on socks because it's very cold in Buffalo and I think socks are super fun. So Indie Bookstore Day, again, we're thinking about foot traffic, but this is also merchandise that's evergreen. So it might debut on Indie Bookstore Day, but I can keep selling this all year round. When not to digress too far off of this, but I moved locations last year. And to move from one spot to a bigger bookstore, we actually launched exclusive merch for our Kickstarter backers. And now it's been 6+ months since that merch was only available on that platform. We're in the process of bringing that level of swag and that merch to an Indie Bookstore Day exclusive. Also spatulas, because culinary bookstore and spatulas seems pretty easy. And throughout the year with Indie Bookstore Day, it's also an opportunity to tell people about the events that are in your shop. So it's an easier, lower level of participation in Indie Bookstore Day. Is if someone's going to come through your store because they're celebrating, how do I incorporate the cooking classes? I don't quite know yet. And I want to be honest about that. That's why it says to be determined. So we do these classes throughout the year where we pair chefs and books together. So is there something that could happen in the store on Indie Bookstore Day that maybe it's a free sample from a local business that specializes in I'm making things up. I have a friend who makes knishes. I have a friend who's an artisan baker, or someone who makes those pickled or fermented goods. It's about, that's all still to be determined. But when I'm thinking about Indie Bookstore Day, to sum it all up, it's thinking about how am I out there in the community for visibility? How am I bringing foot traffic to my store, but also staying niche with what I do? I think the first year I looked around and thought I should be doing what everyone else is doing. And there's stuff you can always learn from all of the bookstores around you, but I also have learned leaning into what makes my shop unique. I curate culinary adventures. So how do I take some of the learnings from other bookstores, but make it my own? So maybe if I know you're going to come to the bookstore because you want to participate and get that stamp, maybe I do have someone who's just doing today, there is free soup for you because again, it is cold in Buffalo. So there's ways to reward foot traffic that are free. There's ways to reward foot traffic with limited edition swag. All of these different touch points that can inspire your customers, returning customers, and potentially new customers. I went through that all pretty fast because I wanted to leave time for Q&A at the end, but that's what I've got so far. Questions? Hi, Meg.
Meg, do you want to quickly tell us how the inspiration of the passport came to you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just walked home in the snow and ice. And I'm getting in my car shortly to head on vacation. So I'll be doing this from the passenger seat of a car. It came from when I lived in other cities, actually. I saw that other cities, sorry, I think an app in the background just keeps wanting to start. I wanted to, in other cities I had lived in, they had done bookstore tours and passports. And also when I first moved back to Buffalo, I went around and drove to a number of bookstores. And every time I went in, I said, Happy Independent Bookstore Day. And some of them were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, what do you mean? I mean, not all of them are members of the ABA, so they weren't exactly sure. And then when I opened the store, I was like, okay, I think this is a great opportunity. And people kept coming into my shop saying there's only one or two other bookstores in Buffalo. And I was like, actually, that's not true. There are so many other great bookstores in Buffalo. And so I was like, what if we just do this? And I emailed everybody and they said they were in. So it's been really fun.
Thanks, Meg. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's right. I just walked in the door, so I'm like, hi, my nose is cold and running. Welcome to Buffalo.
Thank you for having us. Kim, we've got questions in the chat for you. So do you print and distribute the physical bingo cards in advance of IBD? And if so, how early?
Yep. So I wrote an answer in the chat too, just so it's recorded, everybody. But we actually debuted the bingo card back in January as new year, new activation, so that you had the entire year to fill the whole bingo card. Because I'm sure I'm going to have a couple regulars who want the whole card finished. We printed a limited run. I printed about 100 cards because transparently, I had no idea how many people were going to pick this up. But I also hosted on my website, so they can download a version if they want. I like the print one in person. It feels very cute. And also the cafe next door took a handful of them as well. So you get a little bit of that cross promotion. Now, to remind people about the card and that Indie Bookstore Day is coming, I might drop in a new Instagram post, or I might just show up live and go, hey, if you're looking to get a stamp, this is an event in the bookshop and it would count for this tile or something like that.
Thank you. We also have another question about printing and distributing. Do you print and distribute passports? And then does that get confusing for customers to have both?
So each bookstore will be responsible for printing and distributing some of the passports. I will have a stack in stores. I also host a book fair. And at the event, every customer coming in is going to get a free flyer. The difference between them is that the Buffalo Passport program is only a 2-week window that ends on Indie Bookstore Day. So I'm sure there's someone who will stamp both, and that's fine. That's going to be the core difference. And Indie Bookstore Day and our passport program gets a big media push, and the 2-week deadline is very clearly part of the requirements for entrance and participation. Versus the card that belongs just to me, that's also why it's branded with Read and Need, and it's super foodie. Like, you'll pick up pretty quickly, oh, this one says go cook with beans, and this one just says, did you visit all the new bookshops? So I think that's part of our messaging. It's our jobs to make sure that's easy to understand, but I haven't seen a lot of conflict around it yet.
Thank you. So when you do cooking demonstrations on the store on days like this, is there a way that you forecast for attendance? Or is it very clear, like the earlier you come, the better chance you have of getting your grub on, essentially?
So this will be my first try at, I'll call it a demonstration where there's just free food.
Okay.
It's more like, in that lens, you think of it more like a catering order. And I'll look at my past cooking classes average 12 to 15 people. And because that's very hands-on, then there's not as much opportunity to taste things. So it might be part of what budget as a bookstore do you want to set for Indie Bookstore Day. Last year, I leaned in on sweatshirts and found I had a lot of inventory left over. So what I'm going to do this year is reallocate that budget and say, okay, friend who designs and ices cookies. Cookies is a pretty low barrier for me to understand. It costs $2.50 per cookie with royal icing, and maybe my mascot is a little piece of toast named Toasty. Maybe Toasty's going to be on it. Or because Buffalo bookstores, we now have a logo, maybe that cookie will have that logo on it. So it's forecasting. This is a little bit of, I don't know, to be honest, but I also will say first come first, like limited quantities available instead of first come first, some kind of verbiage like that.
Thank you. We are going to move on just to make sure we have enough time for everybody. But if you have more questions for Kim, please feel free to put them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we'll revisit some of those questions.
Thank you for listening to the Bookstore Education Podcast, brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!